So I'm sick of this stuff. We have to talk about it because the American people think the reason for inflation is government spending more money. Simply not true.
Today, an exclusive Five on Your Side investigation reveals where some of your tax dollars are being spent.
Five on Your Side Chief Investigator Ron Regan spent a week in Washington, D.C. uncovering a trail of spending you paid for in ways you never dreamed.
Well, this could make your head spin. While programs here in Northeast Ohio are getting cut, we found your tax dollars are being spent in ways you never dreamed of. Cleveland's air show's been scrapped. Flight controllers at Cuyahoga Airport facing cuts, all because of federal cutbacks.
At some point, we've got to do some governing.
So we came here to Washington, D.C. to show you how some of your tax dollars are really being spent. You pay more than $1 trillion a year in taxes. So we followed your money from federal agencies through congressional hallways.
We're spending time and energy and money moving furniture just like this from one location to another location.
Ohio Congressman Jim Renacci describes the agency overseeing paint and furniture.
Colors on the walls I liked, the furniture I liked, and I said, this is great, this will be the office that they want. And they said, no, you've got to change the color.
All at taxpayer expense.
And they gave me the choices, and I said, no, I like the walls the way they are, just leave them alone. And the furniture, I like it is. And they said, no, you can't keep the furniture either.
There's so much, it piles up here. In warehouses, you pay to store and guard 24 hours a day until auctioned off. And that's just the beginning. We found entire taxpayer-owned buildings sitting empty for years. David Wise is a director at the GAO, the Government Accountability Office.
We know that there's a significant amount of American taxpayers' money that's either going to maintain buildings that aren't being used or that where we could give back leases and get government offices into own space.
At least 45,000 government-owned buildings are sitting empty or half empty, according to the Office of Management and Budget. But we found even the government doesn't really know how many it owns.
It could be more, it could be less.
Yeah, it could be more, it could be less. We really don't know.
And you continue to pay for upkeep.
What's it cost to maintain these?
At that time, they were claiming that the costs were approximately $1.66 billion a year, according to their figures.
That's $1.6 billion a year, spent on buildings like this one in pricey Georgetown that sat empty for 10 years, and this one just blocks from the Capitol, and this one just down the street from the White House. But then we found this.
Hi guys, I'm Urvashi and you're watching Cotton Council International presents Let's Design Season 4.
A reality TV show called Let's Design. You might recognize this Cotton Council logo, a group that received 20 million taxpayer dollars from something called the Market Access Program. Tom Schatz is president of Citizens Against Government Waste.
The Market Access Program is a $200 million a year program at the Department of Agriculture that subsidizes marketing for profitable U.S. companies overseas.
Turns out American taxpayers are paying for a show they've probably never seen. That's because Let's Design airs in India.
Sorry.
Thank you, Weber.
We even found a video game. Prom Week teaches teens how to socialize. Taxpayers paid $500,000 to create it through a National Science Foundation grant. And finally, after searching the halls of Congress for taxpayer waste, we found one more example where taxpayers are getting clipped, not far from the Capitol Rotunda. Down this underground hallway, we found the Senate barbershop that's getting $300,000 a year to keep buzzing along. We wanted to take you inside, but we're stopped at the door. But we have learned that there's a plan in place to stop billing taxpayers for haircuts. Now, listen to this, though. If the federal government sold off all those empty buildings, it could mean a $3 billion savings.
What I can say is that as an elected official, I've been
one of the most vocal members of Congress on inclusion of a path to citizenship for the over 11 million, potentially potentially upwards of 13 million immigrants, undocumented people in the United States. We've thrown everything on the line, and not just in a path to citizenship, but we've also fought for the inclusion. We fought tooth and nail for the inclusion of undocumented people in relief packages, stimulus checks, FEMA assistance, and we've actually helped huge amounts of undocumented families in our district get federal relief that many others were trying to lock them out of.
There's an opinion piece over there on Taxpayer TV that apparently racism is everywhere, and if you don't think racism is everywhere, then potentially you are the racist. Circular logic, right? You pay for it.
Finally, on the legislative front on the CR, both parties must work together to keep the government open beyond the September 30th deadline. As my colleagues know, negotiations continue on a CR to extend funding through about mid-December, which hopefully will give appropriators enough time to draft an omnibus funding package. I thank Chairman Leahy, Ranking Member Shelby, and everyone from both sides working to keep the government open. No one wants to see a shutdown, and I know that includes my Republican colleagues. But in order to avoid a shutdown, Senate Republicans must continue working with us to resolve the issues that remain.
The costs of government are all assessed upon the people.
You know, I believe in government. There are things it can't do, of course, but I think that government has had a positive effect in the lives of millions of people. And yet, no matter where you fall on the political spectrum, it's hard to argue with those who criticize government for the way that it allocates and spends the money that it takes out of our paychecks. The US government is a vast bureaucracy prone to waste and redundant spending. And this is because it doesn't do what most of us would consider to be common sense. It doesn't make decisions based on evidence.
By setting priorities and making sure tax dollars are spent wisely, America can be compassionate and responsible at the same time.
Let me just give you an example of what I'm talking about. In 2005, George W. Bush signed the Deficit Reduction Act, and that bill set up a council to figure out how many federal programs were spending money on things that were actually working. The council found that, for example, the government was funding 105 STEM education initiatives, totaling $3 billion in 2006. Of those 105, only 10 had evaluations that were scientifically worth a damn, and of those 10, just 4 were found to be effective. 4 out of 105 for $3 billion. You can find ugly statistics like that all throughout the government. And the reason is because spending decisions in Washington, and in the states too, by the way, are made on things like costs, on public opinion, on the pressure from lobbyists, and on the particular political ideology of parties and politicians. In other words, everything but evidence. I mean, you read essays on evidence-based policy and you invariably come across sentences like, the rise and promotion of evidence-based orientations within government agencies is consistent with the public sector's increased interest in efficiency and effectiveness. As if before, they were primarily concerned with inefficiency and ineffectiveness. Back to the video. Everything about life in our technocratic society is hyper efficient. I mean, Google just came out with a function for web searching within the messaging app because switching apps is, like really unproductive. I think the feeling is that we're getting more efficient by orders of magnitude, while government is just taking a lot of time switching between apps. The result of that is frustration, and the result of frustration is
one of the great sleazebags of our time.
Why can't we use science and evidence to improve government?
Balance sheet. Is that tax money that the Fed is spending?
It's not tax money. The banks have accounts with the Fed much the same way that you have an account in a commercial bank. So to lend to a bank, we simply use the computer to mark up the size of the account that they have with the Fed. So it's much more akin, although not exactly the same, but it's much more akin to printing money than it is to borrowing.
You've been printing money.
Well, effectively, and we need to do that because our economy is very weak and inflation is very low. When the economy begins to recover, that'll be the time that we need to unwind those programs, raise interest rates, reduce the money supply, and make sure that we have a recovery that does not involve inflation.
He's not kidding about printing money. The Fed issues U.S. currency. That's why it says Federal Reserve Note
on all the bills in your wallet. This is the Bureau of Engraving and Printing, just a few blocks from Bernanke's office. The Fed's mandate from Congress is to put enough money in the system for maximum employment.
He's just sitting back and printing free money all the time.
Fair to say you simply flooded the system with money?
Yes, we did. That's another way to think about it. We did.
Where does it come from? Do you just print it?
We print it digitally. So we, as a central bank, we have the ability to create money.
Yeah, that's how this guy handles all of our money. And Biden just reappointed him to another term. It's no wonder we're screwed. And when the economy tanks, so do poll numbers, and it shows. Look, fresh numbers from Reuters today. Biden's approval rating just hit a new all-time low, 36%. Biden's not good at much, but he sure is good at breaking records.
Well, first of all, the Federal Reserve is an independent agency, and that means basically that there is no other agency of government which can overrule actions that we take.
The Federal Reserve really, even though it is not part of the federal government, it is more powerful than the federal government. It's more powerful than the president, the Congress, and the courts. Now, a lot of people challenge me on that, but let me prove my case. The Federal Reserve determines what the average person's car payment is going to be, what their house payment is going to be, and whether they have a job or not. And I submit to you that that's total control. And the Federal Reserve is the largest single creditor of the United States government. What does Proverbs tell us? The borrower is servant to the lender.
What do you think of the Federal Reserve Board today?
Well, I have long been in favor of abolishing it. I think there is no institution in the United States that has such a high public standing and such a poor record of performance.
What did Arthur Burns think of that?
He didn't like that very much. But needless to say, I didn't hesitate to say it to him. Look, the Federal Reserve Board was established, Federal Reserve System was established in 1914, started operation in 1914. It presided over a doubling of prices during World War I. It produced a major collapse in 1921. It had a good period from about 1922 to about 28. Then it undertook actions which led to a recession in 1929 and 30. And it converted that recession by its actions into the Great Depression. The major villain in the Great Depression was, in my opinion, unquestionably, the Federal Reserve System. Since that time, it presided over a doubling of prices during World War II. It financed the inflation of the 1970s. On the whole, it has a very poor record. It's done far more harm than good.
The problem is that when a nation borrows from a bank, as Proverbs tells us, the borrower becomes servant to the lender. That is not sovereignty. So what is the result? The nation becomes addicted to the loans, and the banks then have power over it. So you no longer have a sovereign democracy. You have rule by banks. Political science has coined a term for this. It's called plutocracy. This is our primary problem with the economy of every nation today. Mr. Obama has stimulated the economy with about $2 trillion. But here's the problem. He's borrowed the money. So he's borrowed the money mostly from the big banks with interest attached. And then what has he done? He's simply turned around and given this money, given it back to the banks, supposedly to lend to us. What kind of a system is this? It's insane. You couldn't design a worse possible system. Banks must stop lending money they do not have. This, as we all know, is called the fractional reserve lending system. It allows banks not to lend out twice as much money, not 3 times as much money, but 10 to 12 times as much money if they follow the rules. And as we know, with the results of the 2008 debacle, here, at least in the United States, that the big banks were leveraged 50 and 52 to 1. Freddie and Fannie were leveraged 72 to 1. Goldman Sachs was leveraged 333 to 1. And then just about 6 months ago, Mr. Obama gets on TV and says, you know, I think we should just eliminate the reserve requirement altogether. So 333 to 1 is not enough. Only infinity will do. If you or I did this, we would be charged with fraud and/or counterfeiting. This fractional reserve system allows the banks to consolidate the wealth of the nation, and that combined with the national debt allows them to use that leverage to control the politics of the nation. So this is a two-pronged problem. When the wealthiest private citizens have control over the money supply, then the government is no longer sovereign. It is no longer the supreme power of the land and can no longer operate in the public interest.
Wolves hiding nearby, whispering do or die around me.
Mr. President, what did you mean by calm before the storm?
You'll find out.
We'll find out.
You said